Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me for today's 5 tips seminar. Today I will share with you 5 tips that will hopefully improve your sports photography. My name is Armando Flores, and I'm a tech rep for Tamron USA. I studied photojournalism in college, but for many years my favorite type of photography was sports photography. So let's get started. What shooting mode should you use? Manual mode is great when the lighting is constant or controlled and you are using a fixed aperture lens. You simply set your exposure and forget it. But when the light changes, you'll need to make a change to your exposure. So now you need to contend with the 3 factors: the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO. Anytime you make a change to one of the 3 factors, you must make a change to one of the other 2 or both in the opposite direction. My shutter speed was not fast enough to freeze the subject, so I needed to make a change to my exposure. My exposure was shutter speed 320, aperture f9, ISO 100, but I needed a shutter speed of a thousandth of a second, so that meant that my aperture needed to open up to f5, or elevate my ISO to 320, or a combination of both, aperture at 7.1 and my ISO at 200. So you can see that this can get confusing really fast. There is a sports mode available, however, it is a fully automated mode and you have zero control. And it doesn't even ask you what sports you're photographing. Shutter priority is a semi-automated mode that allows you to select the desired shutter speed. In this mode, the camera selects the aperture, and you still have control over all of the other camera settings. This allows you a little more time to concentrate on the action, so give shutter priority a try and see if it will work for you. With shutter priority, you can quickly go from freezing the moment to adding a little blur when wanted. Tip number 2, shutter speeds needed. Here is a starting point for shutter speeds needed to freeze the action. And remember, the faster the better. If your subject is motionless, a 60th to a 125th of a second should be fine. If your subject is walking, a 125th to a 250th of a second. If your subject is jogging or running in place, a 250th to a 500, and if your subject is running, a 500 to 1000. As you can see, the faster your subject moves, the faster your shutter speed needs to be in order for you to freeze that movement. This is what a 250th of a second looks like with cyclists traveling at over 10 miles an hour. But at a thousandth of a second, the cyclists are frozen. Tip number 3, auto ISO. You can select auto ISO, but I do suggest that you set the parameters. You can set how high the ISO can go and how low the shutter speed will drop. Your subject may transition from a light area to a darker area as you follow it across the scene. And in shutter priority, your camera is controlling the aperture. It could get to a point where it can't open the aperture anymore. So if you are using a lens with a maximum aperture of f5.6 and the shutter speed view selector requires an aperture of f2.8, this is where auto ISO comes in. The camera now has the ability to change the ISO to give you the proper exposure. Tip number 4, continuous autofocus, continuous shooting, and focus tracking. In continuous autofocus, as the subject moves across the frame, the subject's distance to the camera changes, so the camera needs to continuously refocus to keep your subject in focus. Focus tracking. Some cameras have the capability of locking autofocus on the subject and keeping it in focus as it moves around the frame. Continuous shooting. The faster the frame rate, the more chances you will have to get the right shot. So let's take a look at what 6 frames per second looks like. Let's take a look at that again, but this time a little bit faster. Obviously, the faster the better. Entry-level cameras have a frame rate of 2 to 3 frames per second, while pro-level cameras have a frame rate of between 10 and 20 frames per second. Tip number 5, panning. This is what happens when you capture a fast-moving subject at a slow shutter speed. And these are the camera settings that you'll need: continuous autofocus, continuous shooting, and focus tracking. So position your body in the direction that you're going to shoot. Acquire focus in advance, follow your subject across the scene, untwist your body, and fire off a burst. Now repeat that again and again and again. You should start with a shutter speed that is 3 to 4 stops slower than the recommended starting point. This image was captured at a 60th of a second. This image was captured at a 30th of a second. And this one at a 15th of a second. So remember, no 2 images will look alike. So give panning a try and have fun shooting. Until next time, you can follow me on social media, AF Tamron Tech. Thank you for watching.